Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Demon Fire. My name's Blue Blazing Demon, and this week we're going to be talking about a interesting concept. A fourth video game home console. At least a mainstay fourth video game console, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Where, you know how currently right now we're in the console market, we have three. We have the Nintendo Switch, we have the Xbox One, and we have the PlayStation 4. All of which, you know, are good and well, and actually they're all doing pretty well, except for I would say the Xbox One might be a little, wavering. I'd be curious to see how Microsoft's internal notes and all that. But as of late, there's been two big announcements, with one way in the past, right, that I personally have never really talked about. That's really fascinating me. See, recently there's been a big slew of announcements coming from, of all places, Atari and Intellivision. And in the past, it was ColecoVision, at least that whoever bought up that name. It wasn't the original company. Neither is it for Atari or Intellivision. Remember that it's not the original people for all three companies realistically, right? Intellivision is probably the closest, right? It's really close to being the original, and we'll talk about that. But really in this video, I want to kind of discuss the ideas that these three had kind of come up with and brought. All three have interesting takes. And is it viable to have a fourth video game console? Like, is it viable to have something that lives and it lasts quite a long time? And I find that concept to be very fascinating, because to me, it's always been three, right? For the last 25 years almost, right? Well, 23. Because in the 6th gen, you had what? That's probably the closest thing we had to four video game consoles. And even then, I'd argue against it, because, yes, you had the Dreamcast, the PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox. But realistically, the Dreamcast and the Xbox were never in the same, they never were really on the market at the same time, right? Actually, some of the stuff from the Dreamcast went and helped build some of the bits of the Xbox, which is really its own fascinating piece of history. But I digress. Mainly, I wanted to talk about, just recently, these three companies, ColecoVision, Atari, and Intellivision, have all launched consoles. And it's kind of fascinating because they're kind of the grandfathers of the video game market scene, right? I know there's Pong and a lot of the Magnavox and all those really old school obscure Pong clones and all that. But realistically, the Atari 2600, the Intellivision, and the ColecoVision were the three first actual video game consoles that really kind of had a mainstay power. They all ended up disappearing come around 1983 during the crash here in North America, and primarily their market space was here in America, so when that crash happened, it took them out pretty much. They really couldn't compete. I know Atari kind of drug its feet into about the 5th gen with the Atari Jaguar and all that, but really Intellivision was out pretty quick, and ColecoVision dropped out pretty quick. I mean, ColecoVision has a whole bunch of other stuff that it sells anyways and all that kind of stuff, and it started to peter out on its own. But what's fascinating is 2 years ago we got the Coleco Chameleon, which was bought up by a group of people who wanted to use that name, the ColecoVision name. And what's fascinating is that ended up being an absolute flop, and in my opinion a fraud really on its own front, because even though I love the concept, it was an FPGA based system, right, that allowed you to put in a core and it would run, and so you could update the system periodically, right? With new kind of firmware, which is fascinating on its own point, right? Where you could kind of modify and change the system to what it is. I still think it's a really viable option and could be done really well. I mean, just look at all the analog stuff, like the analog, the Super NT, I think it's called, the Super Analog, runs off an FPGA. Some of the stuff that they did with the Neo Geo runs on an FPGA, so it runs really well, and it's a very capable idea. But it was executed terribly. We've just had absolute travesty in the market, and kind of really put everyone on a pause, right? Well, then things got really interesting, because 6 months ago, really, more or less, we had Atari come out and say, hey, we're making a new console. And that was its own fascinating piece, because really the thought process is, do we really need another console, right? That's when that question really started to come. Why is everyone trying to get into that fourth market space? And with Atari, they're trying to go with a customizable PC. It's really you're buying a PC box, in theory, for their pitch, right? And it's going to have a cool wooden shell, and it'll look like the Atari. And it's called the Atari VCS. Now, it was announced 2 days ago, all that kind of stuff. It's actually doing pretty well. Has amassed on Indiegogo about $1.6 to $2 million, which is really doing well for itself. A lot better than I thought it would really do it, personally. But that's kind of cool on its own front. But really, The interesting one to me is Intellivision. Now, I saw the interview with Tommy Tallarico, who's the one that actually took up the mantle as CEO for Intellivision, which is fascinating because he actually was really well known with the Intellivision family. He knew the past CEO and owner of Intellivision for a very long time. It was always very sad. He had meant to do things with him, and it was really cool, kind of from like an interesting perspective. And so realistically, my opinion of it really kind of comes into piece that Intellivision's idea is fascinating. And their idea is that they want to build a home console that basically takes up the hole that the Wii left, right? Tommy made a pretty interesting quote that really kind of stuck with me. He says it's pretty much a damn shame that he cannot play video games with his father, who's probably at this point, seeing as Tommy's about 50, or at least in his 50s, probably in his 70s, right? Or in his 80s, right? It's probably where his father is. Because he said some of his best gaming memories is playing video games with his parents. And for my family, that's very much true. I have a lot of internal memories of playing Wii Sports with my grandfather, and that's something I never thought would happen in my life, and the Wii gave me that opportunity, and that will forever make the Wii a very special console for me, especially Wii Sports and all that. And I think it's really cool. And the idea is that Tommy wants to go into this and say, hey, I want to take up that space, because really Nintendo, they tried with the Wii U, they failed miserably. Let's be realistic on that. And then they tried, and then they kind of switched gears with the Switch, no pun intended there, switched gears and kind of are hobbling the two, right? It's really more of a mainstream, a new concept for the mainstream with some casual aspects. Tommy really wants to take Intellivision and go into that casual realm. And I think it's actually really interesting because, and I think where this fourth console could actually happen. Like, if you would have asked me before I saw the interview, I would say, no, there's no space. I mean, but he made a good point to say, realistically, there's kind of two subsectors. There's here, you've got the video gamers, and then here you've got everybody, right? And it's sad that all the systems are designed here for the gamer, and then nobody here. When you look at a controller, right, like I hold up the Switch controller, it's a pretty complex beast on its own, right? It's got a lot of buttons to it, right? Plus it's got joysticks, and you got to understand it. Like for us, it takes seconds to learn, right? I pick this up and I know it immediately. But if I hand this controller to my mother or my father, they're going to sit here and do this for a little bit, or they'll just give up entirely. That's usually the route they go, is they give up entirely. But it's fascinating because it is kind of a damn shame to me. I agree with that quote. It's a damn shame I can't play games with my parents because I love games, and I don't think they should be that way. And so his idea is he wants to build a cheap system that has a lot of smaller titles but have really good graphics but simple gameplay where it's only like one or two button presses. And for me, at first, I know for some gamers that's gonna be like, no, I have no interest, but to me, I actually think that would work because I think about it, the games that my parents always loved in the past, or the Wii Sports had one button and a motion, right, with a hand motion, right? You just had to pull the trigger and throw it. Or tennis, you just had to move the controller. Something that just requires one line of thought in the head, not like press this button, then this button, and move, or move forward, press this button, then this button, then this button, and all that kind of stuff. That's not a good way to like teach somebody new. That's really intimidating. That's a lot of inputs at one motion. So for me, the idea of like games that have one button presses, again, another game I think of, Tetris. My mother loves Tetris. Same with my older brother. We used to play it a lot, is Tetris in that, and Dr. Mario. Very simple games with just a few small button inputs. And I think it could really work. Especially since Tommy said he's shooting for something that's well under $200. My estimation, it's going to be about $100. That's going to be my guess, between $100 and $125. I think that's where he's going to hit in the sweet spot realm. He also says he has an interesting controller for it. I'll be fascinated to see it. He's also taken an interesting approach to what the console's going to look like. So I'll be fascinated to see that as well. But it is a cool kind of response, and I can't wait to actually see, because he's going to release a press conference here in a few weeks. Or a press release, I should say, not press conference. Press release that kind of shows off their concept and their idea of what they're going to be going for and kind of gauge interest. And for me, looking at all the ideas of it, right? Coleco is its own scam and it's a problem on its own. Put that off to the side. Atari, I don't know. It's successful now, but I don't see it being successful long term. I think it's just going to get bulldozed by PC and the market that exists. But this Intellivision idea, it's fascinating. And I'm interested. I really am. For me, it's an interesting concept. I would love that, right? Something that's a cheap system that I can get cheap games on and play with my family. Why not? Why would I not have that, right? Me as a gamer, I'd love to play it with whoever. Play it with my fiance, play it with my little sister, play it with my older siblings, the rest of my family. That sounds so cool. Or even if I could play with my grandmother, something that's really simple and just a concept that they like, I think that's got some potential and really could sit as a fourth video game console in the market. So, that and kind of paired with Tommy's, Tommy Tallarico's like passion for it. I really see it in him. He really loves Intellivision. He's been around for years, like decades. He's known him for so long. So, anyways, guys, that's kind of my initial thought, my initial pitch. I actually think the fourth generation could happen soon if it kind of goes in that realm. If it kind of goes more to that broader audience and tries to capture it, yeah, it might not be something us hardcore gamers continuously play and really care about, but I see it as a market that could do really, really well overall. But I would love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know in the comment box below what you think of a potential fourth system. I think this is an interesting concept. I'll be watching this quite heavily within the next few weeks, especially with the lead up to E3. I'm really fascinated to see what kind of becomes of Intellivision. I actually own one. I really like the system from what I've seen of it. And it's kind of cool that it's going to have all the games and stuff and you can play it. That's interesting in its own. So please let me know down below. Otherwise, if you like this video, please hit that like button. Otherwise, I make all sorts of kind of videos right now. I make these Demon Fires, these topical ones, or I do typical reviews, as you can kind of see in my backlog. So hit that subscribe button if you're interested in any of that content. Otherwise, I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!